Hello again, Michael Ware with the Iowa Firearms Coalition's Warrior Wednesday, our show/podcast. We have with us Rob Beckman of the Firearm Trainers Podcast. Some of you may know him. Others are going to learn about him for the first time. Rob, say hello and tell us about yourself, please.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me on, Michael. A little bit about myself. I'm a Buckeye. I'm over here in Ohio and been here my entire life. And I do a little bit of firearm training around the Cincinnati area, the tri-state region, as we call it, both on the pistol, rifle, shotgun, even some muzzleloading type of instructing too. And I do it from the basic bullseye shooting all the way up to the self-defense type, because I'm also a senior training counselor with the United States Concealed Carry Association and promote their programs too. So I'm very much of a 2A advocate, as well as somebody who likes my firearms. I do a lot of stuff with them, from hunting to shooting to just making noise is the best way of putting it. I have a lot of fun with them.
Okay, why? What even got you started? I mean, at some point you weren't a firearm kid or guy or whatever else, and then there was a point where you said, "Interesting." What led to that? I'm curious why.
I would go along and say, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and you saw, the Lone Ranger. You saw, a lot of Westerns and different things like that. TV shows that were out there. And my first experience was really on my grandparents' farm. They used to keep a shotgun behind the door, take care of the occasional groundhog that might be in the field, something along those lines. So, from an early on, I had a deep respect for firearms, but at the same time, looked at them, it's like, wow, that could be fun, be able to go along and shoot tin cans or be able to do things. And that kind of progressed into, when I was a young man, into going to Boy Scout summer camp. And the first time I went to summer camp, they had Marlin lever action 22s. And I don't know how many dollars I spent, because it was only a nickel for 10 shots at that time. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more these days. But, I'd sit there, I'd put my nickel down, I get 10 shots, and, just like Lone Ranger, boom, boom, boom. And I was actually pretty decent back then. Again, we really didn't have, being a suburban family, and nobody in my family really hunted. We didn't have guns in the home. It wasn't that we were against them. It just wasn't, something for them. We didn't have any reasons for it. And then fast forward into my adult life, I went along and decided to take up hunting at the young age of 30, and started getting into, in Ohio at the time, was a shotgun only state, so I was shooting shotgun slugs, but then started saying, okay, I got shotgun, but then you can also do muzzleloader. So I got into muzzleloader, extend the season, got into a little bit of archery, did all those types of things, and then went along and decided to become a hunter education instructor, because I figure, okay, there's plenty of people that are kind of in that older age range, already adults that want to learn more about it. And I wanted to, help more people learn about it. And then when Ohio went to pass their concealed carry licenses in 2004, I was one of the first people that year that went out and got my license, because I said, this would be really good. And it was kind of twofold. One, I believed in self-defense, but then second of all, I was actually hunting across the border, just about a half hour away from me in Indiana. Indiana required you to have a license from your state in order to have a handgun, to be able to hunt with a handgun. So I kind of did twofold. I was able to carry concealed in Ohio, but then I was also able to go along and hunt with that over in Indiana. And again, I went along and it's like, wow, this is really good. You're enabling all these, responsible Americans to exercise their rights. And it took me a couple years, but I went along and finally made time to become an NRA instructor. Once I became a NRA instructor, I started teaching concealed carry classes. And then, of course, that's kind of the entry point to it. But then people would ask about, I want to shoot a rifle. I want to, take kids shotgun shooting. I want to do this. And that's where I started expanding out into all the different NRA programs that are out there for the muzzleloading rifle, pistol, shotgun, as well as their personal protection program. I was enjoying myself, teaching, really kind of a passion for it, to go along and educate, people on how to use a firearm properly. And then the opportunity came up to become a training counselor. And for listeners who might not know the difference between an instructor and training counselors, the training counselor can teach the same thing instructors does, but they can also certify new instructors. So I went along and became a training counselor back in about 2012. And that put a different lens on everything, because I went along and started, just not talking to individual concealed carriers, but I was teaching the instructors who were going to be teaching those concealed carriers. And there again, I was teaching those instructors the basic pistol, basic rifle, basic shotgun, and helping them, get their foot in the door as far as, again, teaching those responsible Americans. So that's a long and short of it.
Okay, all right. They claim, Rob. I mean, and you've got a lot of podcast experience. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But they claim in a podcast it's unwise to go back to the beginning after you started. But I'm going to do it anyway. When you began to describe, when I ask you why, and I didn't have that plan, I just blurted out. I mean, and here we are. But when you began to describe what your childhood, being at the, like the county fair, the arcade, and ding, 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 hitting a few things, I couldn't help, because we're coming at this moment anyway, into the Christmas season, I couldn't help but see Ralphie. I couldn't help but see A Christmas Story. Okay, Black Bart, now you get yours. I mean, I couldn't help but see this kid in his pajamas emulating, like you said, the Lone Ranger and Tonto and these Westerns that we remember seeing, So that's a fantastic story. And I think it describes us at some point, because we do, and this is the important part, we do as children see these things around us. So it's really important how what we see is shaped and how we're fed, if you will, these things, so we don't get the wrong impression. And what we've got in America and beyond, just Western culture itself, you've got a lot of people being fed stupid ideas about what guns are and aren't. And so it's interesting that when I was reading a little bit about you, Rob, and you were talking about, hey, ask me how to talk to your children about guns. I mean, that's a line that I read about you that was prominent. So is it okay if we talk about that for a little bit? Why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah. Like I said, and I bring this up as one of those kind of touch points for parents to really realize that when I was at my grandparents' farm, they had a loaded 12-gauge shotguns sitting behind the door. I don't recommend that these days and such, but 60 years ago, that was what people did. Plain and simple. Gun cases were made out of wood and glass. I mean, we if you've been around long enough, you've seen those types of things. But I use it as an example because we never went behind the door to just play with the shotgun. I mean, if that door wasn't open all the way, people, somebody would say, open that door all the way, because we don't need to be sitting there, having the shotgun being seen. And I think it's really important for parents to realize, because I get the question, when's the appropriate age to, start educating your kid about firearms? And I say, well, right after they're born. And, what I mean by that is, you start educating not by sitting them down in front of you and saying, we're going to go through this book. You educate them by how you treat things. If you are a firearm owner and you've got a 6-month-old crawling around, and you go along and you very carefully, put it on in the morning, very carefully go along, put away at night, you don't leave it lay around, they will pick up on a little bit of that. When they turn to be 2, 3, 4 years old, they'll be seeing the same thing, and they'll get ingrained in them that this is not a toy, that it's something that an adult uses. And then as they turn that 4 or 5 year old and they're a little bit more responsible, you can go along and educate them a little bit on it. Okay, what is this? Why does mommy or daddy go along, carry it? What do they do with it? And teach them that, if you see it, it's not a toy. It's not, it's not a Nerf gun. It's not a water gun. It's, something adults only use. And you start easing them into it, because then they've got the proper attitude about it. And then when they get, 7, 8, 9, 10, whenever they're that age, take them to the range. Let them go along and shoot that 22. Let them shoot a BB gun. let them go along and have that, understand what it's like. Put a target in front of them, take a apple or different things like orange, and have them shoot it with a 22, and have them realize that, hey, this isn't just, pokes a hole in a piece of paper, but it can actually do a bunch of damage. And that's why we treat every gun if it's loaded. We keep our finger off the trigger. We know our target, what's beyond, all these types of things. And of course, you're not going to go along and let a 10-year-old kid walk around with a gun. But if that kid understands that early on, then when they turn to be 12, 13, 14 years old, they will have that respect built into them. So when they're not in your sight, when they're over a friend's house, when they are at Boy Scout camp, anything along those lines, when they're around a gun and you're not, they will have that respect built into them. And I bring this up, simple statistic, they go along and estimate that between a third and a half of all American homes have a gun in them. That's a national statistic. Now, when you go along, it doesn't matter that you're urban or suburban or rural area, you go along and think about how many friends a normal kid has. He's got a half dozen friends that he's going over this place for sleepover. He's going over here for that. You really want to make sure that that child has some kind of understanding, just like when it comes to a hot stove, just like when it comes to a sharp knife. You don't play with them, plain and simple. If you see something like that, go tell an adult. And as they get that respect and they start getting a little bit older, then when they're 14, 15, 16, you can go along and give them a rifle and have them go out to hunt with you. But they've got that respect to say, okay, I'm just not going to shoot at whatever comes in front of me. I got to make sure I'm responsible with this, because I've been practicing this for the last 10 years. And that's, in my mind, really how you go along, build that understanding, to where when they're not in your sight, you don't have to worry about them. It really hurts my heart when you go along and hear a story, and you see them monthly, if on the national news, where somebody, either adult or child, gets injured because of a child having access to a gun. And those are the types of things to where, I'm 100%, supporter of the Second Amendment. But I'll also go along and tell you that if you are a firearm owner, it is also your responsibility to go along and make sure that it's being used in a proper way. That means it's stored. That means that it's, that anybody you let borrow it will use it properly. All these different things that if I lent you my car, Michael, somebody would expect me to make sure that, hey, when I gave you those keys, you weren't drunk, that you didn't have a suspended license, that you were over 16 years of age and not a 12-year-old kid driving around in a vehicle, because that's my responsibility as a car owner. Same type of thing. I support all the guns, have them. But just remember, keep them locked up, keep them away from unauthorized people, because as I go along and say, everybody's always worried about the, 5, 6-year-old kid. Well, most of the time, 5, 6-year-old kids are pretty darn simple. You tell them not to do it and they just don't do it. But it's we've all got that relative that is having some problems. Maybe it's a brother, maybe it's an in-law, something else like that. Somebody who's gone through a broken up relationship to where you wouldn't necessarily trust them being around a gun. Or in today's world, you've got Alzheimer's, you've got dementia, those types of things for older adults. Again, your parent might have been the most trustworthy person around, but if you take their keys away because they can't remember how to make it home from the store because of their advanced Alzheimer's, then you probably need to think about, okay, what am I going to do about the firearms that are around? Because we have a responsibility to the rest of the public, to the rest of the citizens in the United States, to make sure that things, that unauthorized people don't have access to them and causing problems. And could be a criminal, could just be another adult that's having some issues. But it's a serious responsibility we've all got to take.
Well, you mentioned, or excuse me, maybe you didn't mention this. Did you mention already, or did I just read it before I popped on here, that you're running for NRA board?
Yes, I'm running for the NRA board.
Well, why?
I haven't mentioned it yet.
Okay, all right. Well, why on God's green earth would you do that? I'm curious.
If you ask my wife, I've lost my mind.
Okay, well, all right. Should we mic drop there? Are we done or what?
She keeps asking me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" What about that? But here's the truth. Over the last probably 10 plus years, been seeing a lot of moves that the NRA has made that I haven't completely agreed with. They started out with Carry Guard, which was their self-defense insurance back in 2015. That lasted for about 18 months. They came out with NRA TV, which wasn't espounding necessarily 2A rights all the time. They were espounding more political positions than 2A rights, which you may just scratch your head why they called it NRA TV. They made a bunch of spending cuts or changing spending away from some of their core programs like education training into other areas. And then back in 2021 when the New York State auditor came after them, or attorney general, not auditor, and they start revealing some of the misdeeds that the executives were doing. Something needed to be done. And what I did back then was I found the people that I knew that were standing up with their hands in the air saying, we need to fix this. And I said, let's get you on the board. So I went along and, got their petitions and, started circulating them around. And by circulating them around, I got them on the ballot. Then once I got on the ballot, I was promoting them, saying, hey, you need to vote for these people and these people only because they are going to make a difference. Well, I'm glad to say that last year, out of the 25 positions that were available, the reformers were able to go along and get 19 of those positions on the board. So that was a big watershed moment because at that point, the old guard really realized that over the last 5 years, there'd been one person this year, two people the next year, three people the year after that, 19 all of a sudden. There was definitely a momentum there. And with having those, we were able to go along and not only get Doug Hamlin as the new executive vice president, but we also got Bill Bockenberg as the new president of the NRA, both reformers along those lines. And since I had pushed everybody else to run for the NRA board, they kind of basically said I need to do the same thing too this year. So they've kind of drugged me into it because my first reaction, and I talked to many of them, was like, why do they need me? And they went along and said, because we need somebody who'll keep driving and driving to get results, and not somebody who's just like, hey, look at this line on my resume. Doesn't this look nice? And, in my professional career, I'm a IT project manager, which translates into, if anybody's ever been in a project, I'm the person that nags you until you get the work done. I go along and the one that have to justify what the project's doing to executives. And I don't like going along and saying, I don't know. I go along and say, no, we need answers and we need it by now. I, done a lot of projects in my career, from legal departments to compliance departments to accounting departments, and that gives me not I'm an expert in those areas, but I understand the basis of them, and that's where the board of directors, in my mind, doesn't have to be experts in any one area, but they really need to have a good idea about what the process should look like. How do we need to streamline things, because we're in 2025. The organization that worked for us 5 years ago or even 10 years ago is outdated. We've, every company, their listeners probably are thinking about, they've reorganized in the last 5 years. Most assuredly. Why? Because guess what? More stuff has gone online. You get more stuff delivered. You got Amazon. You go along, you click something, it can be delivered within a couple hours, or worst case, tomorrow morning. That's changed the look of business tremendously. Same thing for the NRA. The NRA used to go along, send out magazines once a month. They used to go along and send out these mailings all the time to notify people. Well, guess what? You get social media that, if you don't get out in front of it, will eat you alive. And that's where the NRA, from their marketing department, needs to, I shouldn't say needs to, but they are. I know they are getting out more in front of the social media, have a better face for it. So they realize that, especially from the member perspective, they can really be proud about not only the legislation that they've been pushing and the court cases that they're backing, but also their education training program. That's out there, that's educating millions of firearm owners every year, going along, and they're friends of NRA banquets, which go along and fund, I don't know how many people, but I'm sure hundreds of thousands of youth get their experience with a firearm through the NRA, friend of NRA. They've got banquets in all 50 states and almost every county across the United States. But that funds a lot of the 4-H programs, the scouting programs, the local shooting clubs and such, to help them on range improvements, different things like that. But you don't hear too much about that. And then you've also got the programs, such like Eddie Eagle and Refuse to Be a Victim, that are, out there going along trying to educate people to be a little bit more aware of what's happening. And that's where you've got a lot of programs that nobody's even aware of. Before we started recording, I made a comment about competitions is a big one for some NRA members don't compete in competitions, but how many people out there know that if you can get your child to be nationally ranked in pistol, rifle, shotgun, muzzleloading, that in a lot of cases they can get a Division I school scholarship for it really easily, because Michigan State, you got Ohio State, you've got all these different universities that have shooting teams. You don't hear much about it because of the news. Mainstream media is kind of against promoting those types of things. But do you know, in the last 15 years, the Ohio State University has been the most winning state college in the United States for NCAA pistol championships? They're, in fact, as I understand it, sending two of their shooters to the Olympics. That's how good they are. And the other schools that have gone along and won those championships has been like the Naval Academy and West Point. I mean, where you go along, okay, those guys should be, but it just goes along and shows you the caliber. If I say Ohio State, I'm sure everybody's going to be thinking about football and basketball, but they've got even a more successful pistol team. And I'm vice president for Ohio Rifle and Pistol here in Ohio, and that's one of the things that we're constantly looking at, because how can we bring good shooters to Ohio? We've got one of the best sporting trap courses around, and that is the Cardinal Shooting Center. We in right outside in Delaware, Ohio. We've got Camp Perry up on Lake Erie. All these types of things are really good, but not that many people know about them. And when I talk about competitions, people, they're thinking, okay, I got to be some super duper, accurate person. Well, guess what? They've got entry level all the way up to expert level. And that's where, again, if you want to go out and have some fun and meet some other fellow firearm enthusiasts, competitions is the place to go. And it doesn't take a lot of time. It just takes a little bit of commitment. And the first time you're there, you're probably not going to win. Hopefully you will, but you may not. But you'll meet those friends and you'll find out, oh, I understand how that works now. I understand what I got to do here, how to be prepared for it. And that's no different than any other type of activity. I mean, how many people pick up a golf club and turn into Tiger Woods? Nobody does.
Very
you go
few.
along,
you go golfing, sometime with your friends, and like, oh, I see, you should be using this kind of club, or, well, here, let me take a swing with that. And it's like, wow, this really does feel better. Just like if I go along and, you've got your pistol there, Michael, and I say, oh, here, use my H&K, and all of a sudden, whoa, this thing fits my hands so well. Or, hey, I got a red dot. Well, I haven't looked at a red dot yet. How does that work? And we just share experiences, and before you know it, you've spent a lot of money, but you feel a lot better about it, just as if you were going to the golf store buying new golf clubs or tennis rack or anything along those lines.
Well, that's part of being a community, no matter what it is, whether you're golfing, whether you're, it doesn't matter. Pick a pastime, pick a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
There is a sense of community with it. And I think that when you're outside of the community looking in, you don't know how it's going to go. But usually what you'll find, it's been my experience, Rob, and I'm sure it's probably yours. It's probably anybody who's listening, that once you get out there, you ingratiate yourself into firearm shooting circles, however it is that you choose to do that, I think you're going to find a very welcome group of people. You're going to find a lot of people that say, well, I'm glad you're here. How can I help? Or you might try this, you might try that, or better yet, what makes you uncomfortable? How can I help? How can I manage your concerns? They may not say it like that always, but that's almost always the premise and the way that they think and the way they operate. So I've just had a whole bunch of people look at people like my wife or my daughter, my son, friends of mine, and have an enthusiasm to include them. And it's been absolutely fantastic. And I wish more people approached it that way rather than thinking that this is something that I can't do, can't talk about, or scares me. So I know that it doesn't work until we say that and people listen and try it. But I would be absolutely shocked if anybody listening out here would be able to say, I had an absolutely horrible experience. People were rotten. It wasn't a good time, whatever else. Because when people end up at the range, Rob, they almost always come away with a pleasurable experience. They smile. They're glad they did it. They're happy that they spent their time. And a lot of times they return.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. One of the people I've had on my podcast previously has been Professor Dave Yamani from Wake Forest University. He is a sociologist that is there, and he's a bona fide liberal. He tells you that from that standpoint. But at the same time, he come out with a book called Gun Curious, because so much about what people think they know about guns comes from the media, comes from politics, or comes from the movies. He actually went along and gone to some shooting competitions, gone out. Just this fall, he went out hunting for the first time his entire life. And he writes about it, how it was a lot different than what he was expecting. There wasn't a bloodthirst, as some people describe hunters having. It was really one of those things where it was a deep respect for the animals, and also going along and having a good time in the outdoors, which we always talk about people should be getting in the outdoors. And that's where I think, even if you've got a family member, or you have somebody that is anti-gun, think about introducing them to what guns are really about. And you might not change your mind completely. Dave Yamani is still very liberal when it comes to those social policies, but at the same time, he's got a different perspective when it comes to things, because the evil black rifle is not going to knock you down. At the same time, you go along and you start seeing, what people are shooting, and it's like, okay, why do they shoot this versus that? Well, it's easier for somebody who's smaller, or this is easier to control. Well, that should be all a good thing, when it comes to firearms, versus somebody who can't control something and it's dangerous because it's waving all over the place. And those are the different pieces that don't get enough airtime a lot of times when it comes to mainstream media, understanding exactly what's out there. They try to categorize everything. If it's a black gun, it's got to be bad, and it's like, well, no, not really, because I can show you a lot of firearms I have that are not black that do the same thing as the black ones do, plain and simple. Yeah. So what the color's not the difference. And you really get down to, it's the person holding it. If you're not a criminal, nothing to worry about. If you're a criminal trying to rob the 7-Eleven, you got something to worry about.
Yeah. I'm going to add to the stage now, for those people watching, or your website rather, the Firearm Trainers Podcast. You want to walk us through this real quick?
Well, I don't know if I can do it real quick, but I'll give you kind of the basis behind it.
Well, make it last as long as you like, Rob. Go right ahead. No, we got all the time in the world, man. Walk us through it, man.
Well, as I went along, was talking about 2012, I became an NRA training counselor. And as soon as I started doing that, I got questions, from those people I was training. Okay, I'm ready to teach my first class. How do I find my students? And then as we got further into 2016, 2017, 2018, people were like, how can I post ads on Facebook? How can I go along and find out more information along these lines? And that's where I've came up with the idea at SHOT Show 2019 about having the Firearm Trainer Podcast, because there's no other single resource out there that will give instructors ideas on how to build a business, about ways of organizing. We've talked about accounting systems on the podcast before. We've had authors on the podcast before to bring things to light, to make sure as a firearm instructor, yes, you can teach this curriculum, but also to go along and be the best instructor you can be, you got to stay current with the current trends. A simple example would be in 2012 when I started. Red dots, nobody had them. Holographic sights, they just weren't around. Now, between a third and a half of the people coming to my classes have holographic red dots on their guns. Well, if I hadn't kept up with that, I would be like, I don't know what the problem is. If you can't work it, then, I guess I'll have to get an iron sight gun because I don't know what to tell you. That would not be a good answer for it. And that's where I bring on experts to talk about how a red dot works, go along and talk about how to get into competition, going along. And one of the ones I really enjoyed was one on mentoring. I've had a few mentors as I've been in the industry that have really kind of helped me out and just give me, a perspective on how I'm doing things and maybe how it looks outside looking in for me. And those are things that are invaluable. And I want to pass that kind of information on because there's no need for me to hoard my secret and not be able to share it with you, Michael, or somebody on the West Coast. I should be going along and making sure, hey, let's educate as many people as possible we can across the United States on the value of firearms and how to be safe about it. I mean, nobody should be able to complain about that, even though we do have some organizations that just don't like firearms. But, we should all be going along trying to drive to have that everybody understanding it and then making their own decision about if they want to hunt with it, they want to shoot with it, or if they just want to collect it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It appears as if you've go ahead.
And one of the things that I say that is kind of unique that I've taken is I also do a lot of what I'll call mental health. I've had several experts on, Mike Sedini from Walk Talk America, especially because when it comes to mental health problems in firearm owners, we are unfortunately very good at suicide for it, upwards towards 75% successful in doing that compared to any other form of suicide. And part of that is because as firearm owners, we don't want to talk about things. We don't know what the resources available, and Mike Sidoni has made it his mission to go along and educate gun owners about what's out there. And during the first Trump presidency, he was actually invited to a roundtable discussion in the White House when it comes to firearm suicide and veterans. And that's one of those things that if as an instructor and you're standing in front of a bunch of students and you're teaching them, as I say, you've got a window into their soul because you're looking in their eyes and you can tell from their eyes that they are grasping every word you're saying. You can also go along and identify when they're not understanding things. So you go along and say, okay, let's take a quick detour here and show you something and make sure they understand the points behind it. Something like rifling or something when it goes along and says you want a nice, smooth trigger press. But you also can look at their eyes and tell when it's like, wow, there's something that's just not clicking there. And that's where, having the information to pass along to them about how they can get some free mental health advice. And I'm not talking about they got to be committed to a hospital, but just from the standpoint of Mike Sidoni has what they call, cause a pause. Just if you go along and take just 30 seconds and cause somebody to think about something, that could save their life. And when you talk about suicide, that also saves the family, the spouses, the parents, whoever else is in their family by going through that suicide also. Because when somebody decides to commit suicide, it's not over and done with where nobody thinks about it anymore. You've got friends, you've got families that go along and ask the question forever, why didn't I see that? What could I have done to make a difference? And that's where, as Michael and I have talked about on my show a couple times, if they just know the resources, such as going along and being able to say, hey, Michael, I'm not in too good a headspace. Can you go along and take my guns for a little while? I shouldn't be around them. I know that. Take them. And you can take them. But here's something that, my Walk Talk America, Michael Sedini, has been working, is making sure people realize these mandatory background checks would make that a felon. If I went along, gave you my guns, and I said I just shouldn't be around guns, and you took them, and it's like, okay, that doesn't really make sense, because I think everybody would go along and say, it's, if you're not feeling right, it's best for you to, give them to somebody else, not have the government come and take them, because that creates a whole other issue. But go along, do the smart things, do the responsible thing, making sure that they're not going to be used inappropriately. But we also have legislators that are not considering the complete ramification of some of their ideas and how that could affect people. And I just was reading a statistic this morning that there is, on average, 75 suicides committed a day in the United States with a firearm for it. And we've heard it, previously, up to 22 veterans a day commit suicide also. And when you go along and think about it, they do that because they don't see any other options. And that's where giving and promoting mental health options out there for people is extremely important in me, because you might be perfectly fine today, but what happens when you lose your job tomorrow? What happens when you get home from work and you find a note on the table from your spouse saying, I'm done, I'm leaving, I'm going to my mother's? Or you go along and you come in and you see that final notice on your front door that says eviction, on Monday. All those things can really stress people and cause them to think there's no way out. And in most instances, if they would reach out to a family friend and say, hey, I did something really stupid, I'm stuck, what can you do to help me? People would help them. And that's where people need to know and understand the options that are available to them, because suicides and firearms doesn't benefit anybody. And if I can get that message out there, that would that's a big one.
Well, I agree. It seems like the resources are within a phone call or a touch, and we ought to be smart enough and seasoned enough that we automatically lean on our supports. But sometimes it just doesn't come through the way that it had ought to, like that. It's very simple when you and I talk about it, Rob. It's very easy to understand. And it would seem like when you and I are sitting here talking, people are listening to this and they're saying, well, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you do that? Well, when you're in the middle of something really complex and you can't seem to catch a break, there's a lot of weight associated with that. Those are tough times. And it may not be as simple as saying, well, I listened to Rob and Michael talk about it on a podcast once. I'll just lean on my supports and make a phone call. Well, golly, it's not, it doesn't play out like that as often as that could, but it can, or it should be able to, if we talk about these things the way that you're suggesting, and that they're in the forefront of our minds rather than something that we have to search for when we're burdened with so much else. So yes, it needs to be discussed. And I think that that's a criticism that I have across the board with the Second Amendment community as a whole. We do a really good job, and I think we're doing an improved job of saying no to stupid ideas. For a long time, it seemed like, or it seemed to me, that there was a certain degree of capitulation. Well, if we go along and get along, this thing will go easier. I have never personally been that guy. I tend to be a little naturally belligerent anyway, but I've never really been able to do that well. And I'm no longer willing to foster stupid ideas. I'm not going to do that. If it's not inherently true, I'm really not interested in it. So, and I'll probably at this point try and correct you, because I don't want you to hold stupid or untruthful ideas. But that said, and I think we're improving on that, I don't think we've done a good job of saying, listen, we can't deny the fact that there are problems here that we can we can help with. And us, and the posture that, well, if we don't talk about it, since it is a stain on us, so to speak, or appears to be a stain anyway, if we don't talk about it, then we won't have to deal with it. Well, that's nonsense. Do I think that guns jump up off of kitchen tables and hurt people? Well, no, of course not. That's silly. But are there responsible ways that we could work within this framework and help people, and maybe have less of a tendency towards something accidental happening or something that hadn't ought to be intentional eventually happening? Yes, of course we can. And as long as we're in denial about that, then we can't be We can't be silly enough to think that people who aren't mentally well or temporarily in a bad state are going to be any more clairvoyant about that. That's dumb for us to
Mhm.
assume, since we're going to deny it, that they won't when they're at a low point. Well, that's asinine. So
Yeah.
I think that our community can do a better job of helping with that. Well, just across the board, I think we could do a better job of helping with that. And I think we have a responsibility to do that. Now, in no way am I saying to anybody listening that I am conceding some point about, oh, well, you're making a case that guns should be removed or that they're bad. That's not at all what I said. That's not at all what I mean. But as human beings, regardless, let's do this, Rob. Let's remove firearm from the equation. Do I really care about what method it is that somebody uses to hurt themselves or whatever else? I do not.
Nope.
I don't want them to do it. So if we approach it like that and say, yeah, a gun happens to be a catalyst, just like anything could be, do I want that to happen? No, I don't. So I would really rather help and come alongside somebody. I mean, I've had this discussion with people on our podcast before. The Greeks have many different words for love, one of them being philia, which is brotherly love. And I'm commanded by my creator to love him and love one another. Love, love as you love yourself. Well, I'm supposed to do that by default, Rob. And I can't do that well if I deny the reality that some people may be hurt and maybe there's something I can do. So I think our community can really step up on that. I'm glad to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really important for people to realize why I try to talk about it as much as I do, is if you go along and you fall down, break your leg, have a heart attack, car accident, something else like that, pick up the phone, call 911. They bring you to the hospital, they patch you up, you come home. Mental health is not as well known about how to go along and get assistance, because sometimes you don't have something external to go along and say, see, my leg's broken. It's internal, and that's where you've got to know what the resources are. And sometimes the mental health just is you and your buddy sitting out on the back porch with a beer talking. That's mental health, helping him work through some things, because he's like, yeah, me and the girlfriend had problems and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, yeah, me and my wife had that, but, we kind of worked it out this way. And, you try to trade experiences, because, relationships, they ebb and flow just like water does. You go along and look at, financial, unless you win the lottery, you're going to go along and say, okay, I'm doing good this month, but then you lose a job, or you go along and get find out that, hey, you need to have an operation, or you got to replace the engine in the truck, those types of things. And you go, wow, this is really bad. What am I going to do? If I can't get to work, then I can't do this, can't pay the house, and just starts cascading. As you said, it's never that simple. But if we talk about it, and I can go along and, say, Michael, have you thought about this? All of a sudden, the clouds part, and Michael says, I never thought about that. I could go along and do that. And that's where we as a firearm community, it's not just got to be Michael and Rob talking about it. We've got to be as a community talking about it and point people in the right direction, so that they can get that help to fix the problems for it before it becomes a bigger one. Because it doesn't matter if it's a gun, a knife, a car, anything along those lines. And that's where, people mistaken it. Sometimes when I talk about with guns, I'm talking about for all kinds of stuff, because a lot of people are probably familiar with, there's been a big push for red flag laws nationally. And I am, against those 100% for a couple of different reasons. One, our Constitution guarantees due process. That's the biggest one. The second one is they take the guns and then they say, hey, have a good day. They don't do anything that I know of in any state so far that does anything to help address you. So the judge says that you are unstable and unfit to have a firearm in your house, but you're perfectly fine to stay in the house with the steak knives, with the car engine, with the pills and everything else like that. Tell me how in the heck that makes sense if truly that person was in such dire need that we had to take their firearms away, that you go along and don't do something else to say, hey, we should bring you in for evaluation. Because and the third thing that gets me on too, that most states don't have good controls over, that do have it currently, is going along and making sure an ex-spouse or somebody else like that doesn't use it as a weapon against them. We're going through divorce, and my ex-spouse goes along and says, hey, he's unstable, take his guns. And they come, they take them, and then 30 days later, I got to go along and prove that I'm not unstable. Well, if I had to go through 30 days to try to figure out that I wasn't unstable, I'm probably not going to be super stable at that point, because I'm going to be really pissed off, because I got to talk to lawyers, I got to talk to psychologists, all this to try to go on and prove something that wasn't real to begin with. And there's no way for me to go along and, get any, reimbursement from my ex-spouse, different things like that. And we've all read those kind of stories where people will weaponize, they weaponize kids, in a divorce proceedings, and they weaponize, all these different kind of factors, that if there's no way of really making sure that it's true, then it will be abused.
Well, it's very hard when you enter into a system that doesn't account for the truth. It doesn't seek the truth in order for anything good to happen. So if a couple people can show up and say, I think Rob's a problem, we should pull his access to firearms, and that we should remove them from him. And some places, some state codes read just about like that. And that happens. You don't know about it. It may even happen in a courtroom without you even knowing that it's going on, without you even being present. And then the next thing you know, the sheriff shows up and they confiscate things and all they go. And then you have, as you said, let's say that you have to sit in front of a counsel or somebody that makes an evaluation. Well, Rob, you're probably pretty agitated because you're there anyway. And that would be normal. And now you're looking at these people that have come out of modern academia. Well, modern academia screens. They don't allow people very often through that are wired like you and I, like most of the people that might be listening to this. They only want certain kinds of people to make it through those programs. And so to make it through, to be to get their master's or maybe their doctorate or whatever else. And so it's a high number of people that I think could easily fall into the moniker of anti-gun. And so how are you going to get a fair shake in front of this when you started in front of a judge that was willing to offer you no due process by a person or two that have an axe to grind, and then you're supposed to go in front of an admittedly biased person in order to make an evaluation of you? Well, that is absolutely fraught with peril from front to back. Now, not all scenarios are not, I like that, I understand, but they lend themselves to that enough times that we can't seriously think about this and still love our fellow man. It doesn't work. And so I don't encourage those things at all. I mean, they should be encouraged. And in fact, if we're going to use government in that way as a weapon against somebody else, I think there ought to be really harsh penalties when that happens, because you shouldn't be able to do that to others.
Well, in my mind, if something like that's gonna happen, you need to have a professional with a license that has basically puts their license on the line to say, hey, this person is unstable, they need to be admitted, they need this and this, be able to do things. Because then if that turns out to be false, you got something to go back after, because you can point to them and say, wait a minute, they're licensed and they went along and purposely, maliciously, lied about me for it, when it allows your spouse, ex-spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, your coworker, neighbors, different things like that. You don't really have a whole lot to go back against, because it's just like, well, I saw you didn't seem to be too stable. Well, that's their opinion. If they're making decisions on opinions, you can't hold them. It doesn't allow you to hold too much. And keep in mind, just the money standpoint, what would happen if all of a sudden you had to lose 2 or 3, 4 days worth of work because lawyers visit, psychologists visits, all those types of things, and you were out a couple $1,000s because of that? Again, to your point, you're going to show up at a court hearing and you're going to be pretty agitated, because it's like, okay, I just spent all this money in order to go along and prove my innocence, and I still aren't going to get paid for those days. for it. I still have to go along. If the judge says, hey, you can give them back, most police departments aren't going to go along and just hand them over to you. You got to go through a whole process in order to get them back from them. And it becomes this big circus for it, which, in America, it shouldn't be that way. You should be innocent until proven guilty. Or if you're in that serious of a situation, you should be taken to the mental hospital to have a full evaluation done. Let's not kid ourselves and just take one piece away from them being the firearms for it. Let's take them out of the whole situation, make sure they're safe, and then be evaluated for it. And that's where current red flag laws are a joke, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. So do you see how complex our conversation has become in the last 4 to 6 minutes? Because we're chasing rabbits associated with rabbit chasing. That's really what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to go and put Band-Aids on things downstream that aren't going to work, that have increasingly poor outcomes because they're increasingly poor choices. When I think that it's really important to import the idea, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Is that what they say?
Yep.
Something like that. I think that's really where we're at in this culture across the board, but we're not doing that. We're busy turning to Uncle Sam all the time or somebody else and saying, I'm a mess. Will you help take care of me? Well, there are times when we talked about this in certain terms of suicide prevention and reaching out. There are times when you need to stop what you're doing and raise your hand and say, I need some help. But there are a lot of other times when we need to pull up our bootstraps and say, listen, I can help somebody else. I can be decent. I can see that my next door neighbors, they're kind of old and their wood pile blew over or got knocked over. Can I go over and restack it for them? Yeah. Do I have to wait to be asked to do that, or am I just going to ignore it? No, I can go do those decent things and do these, random acts of kindness, whatever it is they are, with people I see on the street, help somebody in the checkout line, whatever it may be. I don't know. But we've moved so far from that, Rob, that we seem like we complicate our lives every chance we get, and we do it willingly. And I think that it's okay if we back up and just approach things with courtesy and decency again. And I think that if we do that enough and we do that deliberately and often enough, you'll maybe see a little trajectory change in the culture curve. I really believe that, because we don't need to be in a position where red flag laws are actually a thing. We don't. I would tell you I don't think it's warranted right now, but there would be people probably that would disagree with that. It's just, but there is plenty of room for decency in this culture, and I don't think that we're paying attention to something as simple as that.
Something, if people would go back and remember 2020, 2021, during the height of the pandemic and everything else like that, and all the restrictions that the government were putting out there, you can't do this, you got to wear a mask, you got to wear that. I think we probably learned who our neighbors were a lot more, because we weren't out running around and weren't distracted on things, and realized that government is limited. They can only do so much for it. And in big instances like that, a pandemic is something everybody went through. But when you look at like Hurricane Katrina, when you look at a lot of these natural disasters, government is really, really, pushed to the limits to try to respond quickly, or I should say in the time frame that you want them to. We're used to 911, somebody showing up in 5 or 10 minutes. When all of a sudden something like that happens, you're talking hours, or in Katrina's, it was weeks before people were seeing relief. And that's where, who do you have to depend on? Yourself and your neighbors. Your neighbors, you go along and their house didn't get blown away or impacted. You can stay over there for a little bit until more help arrives. And that's when you really realize that we are more than, just the government. We are, the population, and we need to take care of one another, because government's never going to take care of us to the level that we want them to take care of us too.
Yeah, no kidding.
And we're not going to want to pay for that much either, because it's not cheap.
No, not even a little bit. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on? I mean, I try not to jump in too much and guide the conversation the wrong way, because it works really well when guests are able to articulate what they are really passionate about anyway, and what they know about. So is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to relay over to us? Because we did talk about a few things that I brought up, but what else is on your mind that we need to visit about, Rob?
Well, there's a couple things with my bid for the NRA Board of Directors that I want to make your listeners aware of, because I've got kind of a three-prong approach that I've been talking to everybody about. First of all, I want to see the NRA increase their transparency. As members, our $35 a year needs to go along, and we have to have a good understanding about where that money's going. What's it being used for? How are we getting benefit from that? Because if we're going to go along and say, hey, we need more money to do this program or that program, you want to make sure the first $35 went to the right place. And that comes to transparency. And the old administration, the old guard, they weren't very good on transparency. The current board is working on several different things to give members greater visibility, transparency in what's happening. There's supposed to be a NRA member app coming out next year, as I understand it currently. And I'm on the outside. I don't know what's everything going on inside, but that's what I'm seeing. The second kind of prong approach to it is the NRA education training. Back in 1871, the NRA was founded on the idea of marksmanship training for it. Now, NRA has good training for it. The challenge that they've got currently is they really haven't kept up with what I'll call market demand. And market demand specifically being around constitutional carry or permitless carry. We've got 29 states now that have that for it. So I don't need to go to take a concealed carry course anymore, but it's still my responsibility to be a responsible gun owner. And that's just a simple example of where a hole could be plugged for it. And then you go along and look at like modern sporting rifles, AR-15s and such, the most popular rifle design in America. Well, the NRA really doesn't go along in their education training, have a course specifically for that. ARs now, people hunt with them. People shoot competitions with. The NRA has their American Rifle competition, which has been doing really good, and people also are using them for home defense. Well, with all those kind of situations, there should be something out there that they can address that, and those are different pieces. Again, it's not going to be something overnight, but long term, they really need to not only say, okay, we need to revamp these programs, but also how do they meet the current need for it. Some of those will be classes that instructors will deliver. And I think there's also an opportunity there where the NRA could create potentially their own video channel to be able to promote those type of ideas out there, because we all know posting gun videos on YouTube or other platforms aren't very, very popular right now for it. In fact, most of the time they get taken down. Well, why not the NRA go along and talk about safe gun handling? That could be shown that you've got a influencer talking about it to make sure those 5, 7, 10, 14-year-old kids hear from somebody they trust, they've already seen on TikTok, about how not to play with them, the guns. That's, I think really important to make sure that we get the message out there, because we've seen our politicians and the media just does not do a good job of, they complain about guns, but they don't do anything to address the issue for it, basic gun safety, period. And then the third one, and I found, and I came up with this one because not only I was fortunate enough to be nominated by the NRA Board of Directors to be on the ballot, but I also went the extra step to become nominated by the members. And I'm the only non-board member currently that was dual nominated, both from the Board of Directors as well as by the members. And what I found out by talking and going to gun shows is, you go to gun shows and you would think there's got to be 50, 75+% of everybody at a show should be NRA members, right? I found it was more along the lines of 10%. And the reason it comes down to it was that they don't see a need to be NRA members. And because of that, and they say that because they just don't see the NRA serving their needs for it. That needs to change. They need to go along and say, if I'm a gun owner, the NRA is the one looking out for me. They're looking out to say that I can have this in my house, that I can go along, collect them. I can go along and have as many guns as I want. All these different factors for it. The NRA should be standing up from a 2A right. And also, when you look at the last 5 years, National Shooting Sports Foundation has estimated that close to 8 million new gun owners purchased guns during that time frame. They should all be coming to the NRA for training on their pistols, rifles, shotguns, whatever they purchased for it. But in that same time frame, the NRA membership went down by 1 million members for it. Again, they kind of missed the mark on that, because they should have been just signing people up left and right. But again, it's a optic standpoint to where your minorities, your women, all these non-traditional groups just don't see the need to become NRA members because they don't see the value there. Well, that needs to change. And that's where the current leadership is going along, and they're embracing and saying we need to be more open. There is the NRApresidents.com website where Bill Bockenberg will answer questions. You send him questions and he will, look into them. For the reform candidates, which I'm one of the 21 reform candidates, we've got our own website called electanewNRA.com, because we want to get the message out there that the NRA has had its problems. The NRA is turning into NRA 2.0 to address those issues and to make a difference and become a bigger, better, stronger NRA for it. We're kind of fortunate right now in that we're not being attacked legislatively a whole lot. There's a lot of judicial efforts that are going on right now. But let's face it, in 3 years, it could be completely flipped. Or actually, in a year and a half, it could be completely flipped to where we could be in a legislative battle. We need to shore up our house and make sure it's ready for the battles. And the more people we can get that understand that the NRA is about Second Amendments and what the Second Amendment does. It doesn't guarantee criminals a right to own a firearm, period. It doesn't. Well, why aren't we going along prosecuting more of the people that are using firearms illegally, instead of going along making it sound as if that criminal only had a 10-round magazine, they wouldn't be able to rob so many stores. It doesn't make any sense. Some of the logic that we hear for it, and that's where we've got to demand as firearm owners that, okay, if you're going to hold us accountable to these kind of rules, why aren't you, as the politicians, going along and enforcing those laws that you've passed, even for the people? Because if the criminal goes along, gets slapped with 5 to 10 years in prison, and they don't come out for 10 years. They'll think twice about going along using a firearm again. Of course, they're going to use something else. Maybe they're going to use a baseball bat or a knife, but you've got to go along and make sure the criminals see that there is no upside to using a firearm, and they should turn their life around.
Well, I think that those are 3 very good prongs. It's obvious that they're well considered and well thought out. Real quickly, I guess I'm compelled to ask, when you visit with people about these 3 tenets that you want to run for the board of NRA upon, what kind of reflection are you hearing, Rob? What do you see back from people?
The biggest one is that first one. They are pissed off at the old guard that, millions of dollars were paid to an executive vice president that was then turning around and charging expenses to the NRA in the tunes of millions of dollars for it. And it hit home a couple months ago to me, because the old executive vice president was making $2.5 million a year. That was approved by the board of directors back at that time. $2.5 million for a nonprofit. That strikes me as excessive. But then it really hit home to where I went along, and I was in a gun club and looking around, and there were a whole lot of blue collar workers, plumbers, electricians, people like that. And I know that they're not making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. They're working with their hands and putting in time, and realizing that for somebody making $50,000 a year, that's 50 years worth of work to make $2.5 million. And he was getting it every single year. And that's where I went along and said, the new executive vice president, Doug Hamlin, he's making a little over $500,000 a year, which I think is a little bit more reasonable for a organization such as the NRA. He's got a lot of responsibility for running it properly, and as the board told him accountable for that also. For it, as a board candidate, I had a pledge to sign a non-compete or our agreement to where I'm not going to go along and profit from anything being on the board. There were some misdeeds previously where board members were making money because they were on the board for it. They were making backroom deals and different things like that. And those are the things to where we need to get a new board on there that goes along and isn't saying, how can this help me? And more so going along and saying, how can I help the NRA become, bigger, better, more relevant in what's happening in the 2A industry as a whole.
Well, fantastic. I'm glad that people are giving you the feedback that you need in order to adjust your sales, so to speak. And I'm glad for that. I mean, you've got to have these conversations. These people need represented. As you said, I mean, I don't want anybody out there to think that NRA is a corrupt organization full of corrupt people. But I will say that it is inhabited by people, and people make mistakes. So the question is, are you going to leave it like that, or are you going to exact or extract some method of change and rectify these mistakes and move forward better? Because what you really want to do is identify the mistake and then say, okay, this is what led to making this mistake, and this is how we avoid it in the future. Well, that's healthy. That's how you take care of things. And if that's what's going on here, and that's what I am seeing from what I can tell, I'm very happy about that, and I'm good. So I'm not going to continue to beat the NRA up when then they don't need to be beaten up forever. I mean, we've talked about some of these things already when you talk about mental health or whatever. There is no value to somebody who has a mental health ailment or a struggle if you label these people as crazy and then you leave them labeled that the rest of their lives. What incentive do they have for seeking help if you're going to put something on it and then leave it with them forever? Because they do go get help, they do whatever it is they need to do, and then they're well again. But you still call them crazy? That doesn't work. So it's the same thing with NRA. Mistakes were made, fine. Let's identify them. Let's correct this practice or make a change here, a different best practice or a best practice we'll implement. Okay, now we're not corrupt, or we never really were, they were mistakes, whatever. So I want people to understand it's a worthwhile organization. It always has been. And oh, by the way, it's run by people, and people screw up. So let's have a few screw ups as possible. And when we do screw up, let's make it right as quick as humanly possible as well. Yeah. And I think that it doesn't have to be any more complex than that. So Rob, thank you for your willingness to do that stuff.
Yeah, and here's one thing I think people should realize. You've got Gun Owners America, you got Firearm Policy Coalition, you've got the Second Amendment Foundation, American Suppressor Association, all these different organizations that I belong to them as well as I belong to the NRA for it. And it's not an either or. It's one of those things where it's an and, because the Second Amendment Foundation does great work when it comes to litigation for it. They go along, Adam Crowd over there. They really push, and they get stuff in front of the Supreme Court. That's great. The NRA pushes too, but they're also more kind of Washington, D.C. from the legislative side of things. And sometimes people don't really realize where these different groups play at. And then you got Gun Owners of America and Eric Pratt over there. They do a lot of local activism and such to really push the ball in the right direction there too when it comes to 2A rights. And each one of them, we're all in the same space, but they're also got their own unique little corners of it. And that's where I go along and tell people, well, I'm a GOA member. It's like, great, so am I. It's not that you've got to be one or the other. Think about what each of the groups are doing and support them appropriately for it. The Big Beautiful Bill that took the NFA tax down to zero, that was a combined effort between the American Suppressors Association, NRA, Second Amendment Foundation, Gun Owners of America, a big coalition for it. And the strange thing I tell people about it, that why I'm bringing that up being such a big monumental step, is the NRA 5 years ago would not have played ball with all those other groups. It was our way or the highway type of thing. If it wasn't our idea, then we weren't going to support it. And that's a bad idea when it comes to the 2A rights, because you might have a great idea. I might have a good idea, but if we can't support each other, then we're going to die, separately. And that's where we've got to go along and make sure that we're getting behind the things that make sense, and the stuff that doesn't make sense, let's move on. We don't have to spend any more time talking about it.
Agreed. Rob Beckman, thank you. Now, how can people Walk us through what, real quickly before we go, walk us through what voting is like as an NRA member for the elections themselves. When are they going to see something come to them? How do they handle it? How do they turn ballots in so that people are able to participate in this process?
Yes. The NRA members that are eligible to vote are members that have been paid members for 5 continuous years. It's not that they've paid for 5 years; they have to be 5 years. So, the election will be in February 2026. If you've been a member since February of 2021, you'll be good, or you're a lifetime member. So you can sign up, be a lifetime member up until I think March 1st or somewhere around there, and still be able to vote. If you are eligible, you will get a ballot in your magazine coming at the end of January, the beginning of February. If you get digital magazines, they'll be mailed separately to you. Once you get the ballots, there'll be a listing of 38 names on there, and they will be in random order. My ballot will have on it will be different than what Michael has on, different than all the different ones, and that's to make sure to make the voting as fair as possible. And you'll be able to go along and vote for up to maximum of 29 people for it. Normally it's 25, but this year they've got an additional 4 director spots that they have to vote people in on for. You fill out that. As long as you only vote for 29, your ballot is valid. You can vote for less than 29, but you can't vote for any more than 29. If you check off a 30th, then that ballot is no longer valid, and you've got to request a new one for it. You mail it back in to the NRA before, I believe it's March 22nd or something else like that. Check the dates on the form is what I'll defer to. And as long as they receive that back in time, they will go and be counted into it. So make sure you know who to vote for. And again, go out to electanewNRA.com. My name will be out there as well as the other 21 candidates, and you can see what our profiles are, where we stand on the different issues, and turn your ballot. And whether you are this is the first election that you've voted in, or if you've been voting in all the elections the last 20 years, take it seriously, because these are the people that are going to be representing you to the NRA for it. We as the directors will be holding the executives, Doug Hamlin's, accountable for what they promised. We'll be bringing the issues to their attention to say, hey, we need to reach more out to this demographic, or we need to do more in competitions along those lines. And it's really important. The last thing I would go along and encourage people to do is, when you get your ballot, go along and talk to your other friends that are NRA members. Talk to the people at your gun club. Encourage them to vote too. Again, it's only one vote, but as in the 2025 elections, the bottom 5 people were separated by less than 200 votes. And I bring that up from the standpoint of, if you go along and you just get a couple people at your gun club to say, yeah, I'll send a ballot back in because I like what you said about Rob, or I'm going to vote for these 3 people. That could be the difference between getting on the board or not getting on the board. And that's an important thing for people to realize. Your vote really does count. Less than 75,000 NRA members vote in the election every year, and there's 3 million members. So when you start looking at that, that's not even 10% of the NRA members vote. And that's where you really got to go along and keep that in mind, that your vote really has can have a major impact.
Well, you're so right about that. I'm glad that you brought it up and we talked about that, because everybody says it. We say it all the time. These elections have consequences. Well, if there are things you want to see, well, get engaged, be part of it. When it comes to electioneering, IFC is telling people all the time, you want to make a difference? Then go vote. And oh, by the way, you already know 4 or 5 people just like you. There are empty seats in your car. Take them with you. And what you're saying metaphorically is the same way. So I encourage people, if you're eligible to vote, do your research and cast your vote. You're supposed to do that.
And here's one thing I offer to everybody who's listening to me. If you've got questions, you don't understand what I was talking about, something on this podcast or something else like that, send me an email to my personal email account. It is scouter65@gmail.com. SCOUTER, the number 65 @gmail.com. And I throw that out there because I'm going to be an open book about it. If you tell me that something's broken, it needs to be fixed, I'm going to go, look at it and say, hey, this is what I found. If you go along and say, I like what's going on here, I'll say, okay, I'll pass that on and make sure that, that continues happening. Because as a, board of directors member, assuming I make it, I want to be that conduit to, not only go along and help guide what has been happening or what will happen with the NRA, but also go along and make sure we continue the stuff that the members see value in. And the only way of doing that is having an open ear and listening to what the members want.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Rob Beckman, the Firearm Trainers Podcast, among 15 other things that you're doing. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for coming on today and visiting with us. Thank you for your willingness to run for the board of directors of NRA. Thank you for helping other people do it, by the way. And I appreciated the conversation. We've touched on some things that I really think that we shouldn't be ashamed or afraid to touch on. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, for having me on.
Have a good day.